What is up, ladies and gents? It is Dave, it is Duncan back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Fresno, California's Elder Devil. The band's new album, Everything Worth Loving, will be released on June 16th via Prosthetic Records. The band formed in 2016. This is the second album from Elder Devil, which follows up the band's 2019 album, The Light Dimmed Eternal. Upon completing writing for the musical components of Everything Worth Loving in January 2021, vocalist Stephen Muir took meticulous care in penning the lyrics to their sophomore 13 tracks. With the passing of his mother at the forefront of his mind, Everything Worth Loving is tinged with a personal loss and sense of displacement. Melding the insular and universal aspects of such grief is exemplified on the title track's ponderance of love itself, as Muir questions, why do we love and why does that love leave? Elder Devil's answers for such questions are not easily stomached, but beneath the surface of their harsh noise lies a comfort within the cacophony. With guitarist Jacob Lee once again taking on production duties, Elder Devil commenced recording and mixing sessions between April and May of 2022 before handing over mastering duties to James Plotkin, who has worked with Cave-In, Old Man Gloom, Street Sects and many more. The resulting 13 tracks possesses a fervently raw side to the band, capturing Elder Devil's live explosiveness and grit in equal measure. So, this was a band I hadn't heard of until now, but when I saw they were on Prosthetic, I was looking forward to getting into this one.
You kind of know what you're getting, like production-wise. You kind of know what you're getting when you pick up a Prosthetic like release. They have a tendency to release music that just captures chaos.
Yes, absolutely. Plus, we've had quite a good selection of kind of grindy kind of releases this year.
This year's seems that I don't want to call this a year of grindcore because it isn't. But no. there's been a wave of really good bands putting out stuff this year. So
we scored a couple of high ones and like Rotten Sound and See You Next Tuesday and stuff like that. Yep. So always keen to hear more from that scene as well. What did you think? I'll let you kick off. What did you think of Elder Devil's new album?
Yeah, Elder Devil are like what you would get if you took like Hail Destroyer level Cancer Bats, kind of melded them with like a really unsettling grindcore kind of Pig Destroyer, then like fronted them with Casey Chaos from Amen. And there's really snarly, punky attitude about them that I kind of fucking love.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere all over this. It's a relentlessly disgusting album. Disgusting as in it keeps piling on, like the aggression, the kind of unease, and the ferocity from pretty much the opening riff right to the fucking end. There really isn't that much in the way of any respite. Now, that's not to say there aren't moments where they deliver something kind of off to the side. The reason I mention something like the Cancer Bats is there are a collection of songs here that have this southern kind of sludgy tinge to the grooving, whether it's on New Grief or Insomnia, which kind of go back to back into each other. And then later on in the album, where they introduce that again, things slow down a little bit, but never too much. There's always that threat behind the end of any riff that they do that things might just fucking go off again. And I think the actual layout of the album itself adds to that. The first three tracks, Endless Need, The Hymns at Night, and A Wash in Light, are basically three back-to-back fucking frag grenades going off. They start off almost immediately with the vocals screaming and a cacophony of fucking very, very fast, grindy core drums hitting you really, really hard and kind of feverish, like very, very fast kind of punky guitar picking. And all three of them. So, but like those three tracks grouped together are under 6 minutes in length. So you get hit with what feels like almost like 3 very, very, very quick punches in the face before it settles down into My Body as an Earthen Shrine, which once again is still very kind of ferocious, but that it drops a level and then into New Grief, which then brings the kind of sludge, the groove. It really fucking slows things down, and Insomnia the same. But then the album picks back up again. So I actually think the placement is really, really clever on this one, very much like it was when we discussed See You Next Tuesday, in that whenever it feels like you're getting to the point where you're like, you know, you just kind of feel like you need to take a wee seat, the album switches its pace or tries something different or introduces a new kind of styling that gives you something to hook on to, even if it is fleeting for half a song, a full song, or even like 2 minutes. There are elements in there. The production on the album is fucking raw, as Gordon Ramsay would shout. It's weird to describe how something like this can be as unsettling as it is. I mean, it's clear as a bell. You can hear every instrument, and so it's immaculately produced. And there's very little in the way of any like immediate sounding fuckery there. But what it has done is allowed the kind of viciousness of the guitar chords specifically, their own room to really kind of just sit with you, like an uncomfortable exchange on a train with someone you don't know, or like sitting with your friend at a McDonald's drive-through when Daddy, the last track on that fucking Korn album, comes on, and you have to sit there listening about paedophilia. Just like wholly uncomfortable, like just that way where you're like, I would much rather be doing anything else than listening to this right now. It forces you almost at gunpoint to listen to this vocalist who sounds amazing. I love his tone. Absolutely love his tone. It's somewhere between Liam from Cancer Bats and Casey Chaos from Amen. In fact, weirdly enough, as soon as this finished, I went back and spun those first 2 Amen albums, which I haven't listened to in a fucking age, man. Like Ross Robinson doing his thing. You know what I mean? It just reminded me, it's that kind of, that lightning in a bottle, like almost force majeure, like breakneck, just rage, just distilled in your face. I think it adds so much character because there's a snarl, there's a bit of tonality in it as well. He doesn't use it often, but his kind of punky, aggressive screaming has its own character to it. That you make out everything the guy's screaming about, but that doesn't mean he's kind of loosened anything off. Like in Insomnia, there's a bit of reverb on it, and he's letting out these screams and these howls kind of tonally over the background of these fucking big, chunky, sludgy riffs, and it just works. But we could jump like right into What Do You See, which of course makes me think of like Red Dragon. So what do you say? Because that's the way my brain's wired, and it's right back to being kind of vicious, snarly, and back in your face. And those elements are kind of almost removed from it, but they're not needed for the track. So it continues to kind of weave and deliver just like attitude after attitude. To be honest, it doesn't deviate far from the course at all, but then it's not a particularly long album. For its 13 minutes, it clocks in about 35 minutes in total. So 13 songs, 35 minutes. It's not a lot, but I did feel exhausted when it finished. I will be honest. It does feel like someone bearing their soul, and that can be uncomfortable to listen to, in one sitting especially. This kind of fucking fucks and slaps at the same time, without really giving you permission to say no to either. It's just a really brutal, really ugly piece of music, but it's weirdly compelling. It's difficult to switch off. It's difficult to turn away, and as it plays through, every time you think like you're like, oh, this riff's fucking amazing, the drummer will hit it with this wickedly fast fill, and then you get another riff and you're like, oh, this is amazing, and then the vocals coming over the top of it. No fucks given on this album, and I kind of love it. It is definitely amongst one of the better, and I'm loath to call it a grindcore album. It has grindcore leanings for sure. It's definitely grime inspired, But it's not, fully that way. But then it's not really a punk album or a sludge album. It's kind of a smoothie of the lot.
Yeah.
It's great. It's really, 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 really good. It's very, very, very vicious. And I don't know how quick I'm going to spin it again, but I will come back to this album again this year, especially if I'm having a bad day. Exactly the sort of shit I like to put on when things are like, this is how the family know that I've had a bad meeting at work. Oh, he's playing the Elder Devil again. Better give him 35 minutes. The weird thing about it is, like, when I listen to certain albums, I'm like, oh, I don't know where he's gonna land in this one. I'm fairly sure I know where you're going to land on this one, because there are certain moments, like, especially like on What Do You See, when you get those fucking huge kind of like chunky riffs and really, really, really good drumming, that I was kind of like, yeah, Dave's going to like this one. Yeah. So I await to be proved wrong, but I will gladly cup your balls if I'm wrong.
Nice. I might just lie for the rest of this review.
Just for lie for that, Dave. You just need to
ask. So, Elder Devil. I agree with yourself that there is obviously a grind element to this, but it's not the only kind of part of their sound. You've got that sludge, you've got that kind of blackened hardcore, a little touch of death metal at times, and that kind of crusty punk as well. So a really good mix of styles, albeit all very much within the scorched earth levels of intensity. I think I actually did go. I went back and checked out the 2019 album, the Light Dimmed Eternal, and it's, believe it or not, it is more abrasive than this album, especially in the production, which I'll come back to, but also in the need just to just spill their guts as quickly as possible. It's a very instant album, that debut. It doesn't fuck around, and it just keeps this constant level of heat for its entirety. I felt like this album had that same urgency, that same kind of ferocity, but a much cleaner delivery than the debut. Definitely not as kind of rough around the edges, but still has that kind of like chaotic personality as well. I felt there was more of a kind of emotional outpouring on this one, not just from like the kind of like vocal or lyrical point of view, which I mentioned earlier, but I think musically as well, there is a touch more kind of misery in the chord choices on this. There's more of a kind of blackened core that almost pushes the guitars into a slightly darker place, and you can hear that tracks like A Wash in Light or Puncture Wound are really kind of soaked in that melancholy. That kind of gives this album a different slant to the debut, which was also bleak, but a different kind of bleak. It felt more up front, whereas this feels like it's almost coming from the inside, if that makes sense. The same can be said about the vocal performance from Stephen Muir, who I totally agree with what you said. I think there is more character to his voice this time around. I feel like he's using more of his voice and the different kind of inflections that he has to offer. You can also hear, it's funny you mentioned this, but you can hear there's more enunciation on this album, which is partly to do with the production, but I like the cleaner kind of delivery. You can even hear a lot of the kind of the breaths that he takes before he lets kind of rip, and that was really cool because you could hear that he was like putting fully everything into it. And obviously some of the themes on this are coming from a place of grief and loss, so you can imagine the vocal parts are very emotionally charged. Even on the kind of slower stuff like Insomnia, you feel every word of it. This is a very similar length to the debut, same amount of tracks, and the tracks all range from like a minute and a half to just under kind of 5 minutes, which again, very similar to the debut. I think the debut had 4 or 5 songs that were like under a minute, which this doesn't have. So you are getting a slightly more extensive version of Elder Devil, slightly. But I actually do think I prefer the slightly longer tracks, especially tracks like My Body is an Earthen Shrine or Insomnia, where they do give you a bit more kind of diversity and speed and pacing as well. Insomnia is an interesting one, and I don't know, I might be looking too much into this, but The longest track on the debut album was 4 minutes 48 seconds, a track called A Small Room. The longest track on this album is Insomnia, which is 4 minutes and 48 seconds. Both tracks have a very similar pace and a kind of similar slow, kind of doomy, sludgy tone to each other. I'm not sure if that's intentional or if there is a link, but it seemed quite similar for it to be a coincidence, but
You're
I don't know.
2 seconds away from putting a tinfoil hat on. I swear to God.
Probably. But
Coincidence? Think about it. 9/11. Inside job. Think so. Like,
okay, scratch that. But I really enjoyed that. As track, I think it's track 6 on the album. It plays a really good part in kind of
Breaks it
slowing
up,
things down for a second. It's not overcomplicated in the riffs department, and it's giving you a little bit of that kind of like bleak kind of melody thrown in for good measure, which I really liked. And I do think that the mix musically is just more interesting than the debut overall. There were far more moments on this that I kind of locked into and synced up with. And I think that was just to do with a lot of the variants they have in the riffs. The riffs are fucking killer. Like there was so many moments where I would just, like you said, I would just be like stopping, like, oh yes,
Yeah.
that's fucking awesome. The sludge stuff sounded killer. It's really erosive sounding. But then you've got these like the blasts, the grind that's giving it energy and ferocity. And then those bleaker, you can almost put it in like a Will Haven type category where it slows down and you're just kind of wallowing in it. And it just, those moments I just felt like I wanted to move my head to it, those just slow kind of grooves. It's also like super tight as well, but not in a clinical way that it loses anything. You know, you don't lose that kind of like the visceral kind of grindy kind of essence that you would normally get. Production, as I mentioned earlier, I think this has gone up a notch. This is right up my street in terms of the production on the album. The debut was very abrasive in production, like just it hits you with everything full force. And I felt that album for me was a bit exhausting. When I was hitting the kind of the last quarter, 3 or 4 songs of the album, I was like, okay, right, I've kind of had enough. But I think this album is still a fucking rager, but and it's not diluted in any way. But it's a grindcore album, but I think it has more finesse to it than the last album. I think the production's a bit cleaner. It's not as kind of eroded sounding, and I think it makes it slightly easier to digest. I'm not sure if that's just Jacob getting better at recording or if it was a kind of conscious decision to have a more slicker sound, but I think it definitely benefited this album personally. This is another ripping grindcore album to add to the list in 2023. As you say, it's just over half an hour. Doesn't really overstay its welcome, and I feel like it gives you more of what Elder Devil are fully capable of. So great signing by Prosthetic. It's another amazing band on the roster, and really excited to see what these guys do. Love to see them live if they were coming over to the UK, especially Scotland, obviously. That'd be really cool to see.
I'm glad that we have to remind anyone touring the UK that Scotland is if you're booking dates, it'd be nice.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sick to the back fucking teeth of seeing tour posters say UK tour when the only place they're going is fucking England. That is not a UK tour.
They occasionally put a Welsh gig in there. I mean,
not a UK tour. Anyway, what do we think? Score for Everything Worth Loving by Elder Devil. What are you thinking?
I'm coming in on a 4 on this one. I really, really like this one.
Yeah.
I think it's super tight. It's really, really interesting. Very well put. The album is very well put together. It is exhausting for me. I'm not going to lie. I do feel like when I'm finished the album, I weirdly I mentioned Amen. I remember that the first time, like I listened to Amen, I was the same. Like when I finished that first album, the first time I was just like, kind of feel like you need to go and sit down for a wee while. And there's a place for that. Not every album should be an instant, let's spin it again. Sometimes you need to sit and digest what it is you've just consumed.
Yeah.
And I think the album falls into it. I think if this is album 2, I mean, like there's no telling and no stopping where they can go because they're already showing so many interesting weavings of different stylings into their music, that they could lean more on any of those facets and get a different sounding album, which I think would be just as compelling.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely one to watch for me. And once again, you mentioned that I think Prosthetic are doing really fucking good work this year as a label. They picked up a really good eclectic. They used to be the place that if you just wanted to, like, if your friend said, have you heard this heavy album, you would point them to anything on Prosthetic which would sink their battleship.
Yeah.
But nowadays they've got levels of that, and this is comfortably amongst it. So yeah, 4 from me.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree. 4 from me as well. I think I feel like they have stepped it up on this one, musically, vocally, and in the production. And I prefer them just pushing the length of the tracks ever so slightly. I did feel like it made the album more fulfilling for me. So yeah, I've got 4 out of 5 for this one from Elder Devil. That is the review. The album comes out on June 16th on Prosthetic Records. I'll put some links below to the band's Facebook, pre-orders, all that sort of stuff, so you can check them out. Let us know what you think. Have a listen to some of the singles. Drop some comments below. That is the review. Thank you for checking out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.